The moment I pushed open that hidden door behind my husband's bookshelf, I knew my life would never be the same. What I found inside that secret room wasn't just disturbing. It was proof that the man I'd been married to for 12 years was a complete stranger. Photos covered every wall, hundreds of them. And they weren't just of me. I'm Jamie, and this is the story of how I discovered that my perfect marriage was actually a carefully orchestrated nightmare, and how one secret room revealed the truth about the monster I'd been sharing a bed with. Standing in that cramped, windowless space behind Dawn's law office, staring at surveillance photos of myself that I never knew existed, I felt my entire world crumble. Pictures of me leaving work, grocery shopping, meeting friends for coffee, even sleeping in our bed, all taken without my knowledge. But worse than that were the photos of other women, dozens of them, all beautiful, all unsuspecting, all with the same terrified look in their eyes in the final photos before they seemed to simply vanish from the collection. My hands were shaking as I realized that everything I thought I knew about my husband, Dawn Tomas, was a lie. The successful corporate lawyer, the devoted husband, the man who brought me flowers every Friday and remembered every anniversary. He was a predator who had been stalking and documenting women for years. And I was just his latest victim. But let me back up and explain how I ended up making the most horrifying discovery of my life, in a secret room that shouldn't have existed. My name is Jamie, and until 3 months ago, I thought I was living the perfect life in Minneapolis, Minnesota. At 38, I'm the senior marketing executive at Nordstrom Corporate, managing campaigns for their luxury brand partnerships. I've worked incredibly hard to build my career, often pulling 60-hour weeks and traveling across the country for client presentations. My job is demanding but rewarding, and I make excellent money doing work that I genuinely love. I met my husband, Dawn Tomas, 14 years ago at a charity gala downtown. I was there representing my company's sponsorship of a children's literacy program, and he was there as legal counsel for one of the major donors. Dawn was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Tall, handsome, successful, and charming in that effortless way that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. He had this incredible ability to make you feel like the most important person in the world when he spoke to you. "You have the most genuine smile I've seen all evening," he said when he approached me that night, and something about the way he said it made my heart skip. We talked for 3 hours straight, completely ignoring the rest of the gala. He was a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, and he had this fascinating way of explaining complex legal concepts that made them sound like thrilling puzzles rather than boring business details. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Dawn would surprise me with thoughtful gestures, tickets to shows I'd mentioned wanting to see, reservations at restaurants I'd posted about on social media, even small gifts that showed he'd been paying attention to our conversations. He remembered everything about me, from my favorite coffee order to the names of my childhood pets. After 2 years of dating, he proposed during a weekend trip to Duluth, getting down on one knee at sunrise on the shores of Lake Superior. "Jamie," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you've made me believe in love again. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." Our wedding was beautiful, elegant ceremony at the Cathedral of St. Paul, followed by a reception at the St. Paul Hotel. Dawn's attention to detail was incredible. He'd remembered every preference I'd ever mentioned and made sure our special day was exactly what I'd dreamed of. Looking back now, I realize how he was already cataloging my preferences, learning my patterns, studying me like a subject rather than loving me like a wife. For 12 years, our marriage seemed perfect. We bought a beautiful colonial home in Edina, one of Minneapolis's most prestigious suburbs. Dawn's law practice was thriving. He'd made partner at Thornton & Associates and was bringing in major corporate clients. I was climbing the ladder at Nordstrom, eventually becoming the youngest senior executive in the company's Minneapolis division. We traveled together, entertained frequently, and were considered one of the most successful couples in our social circle. But about 6 months ago, things started to feel different. Dawn began working longer hours, taking mysterious phone calls that he'd step outside to answer, and traveling more frequently for what he called sensitive client matters. When I'd ask about his work, he'd give vague answers about confidentiality requirements and change the subject. I also started noticing small changes in his behavior. He'd become extremely interested in my daily schedule, asking detailed questions about where I was going and who I'd be with. He'd bought me a new phone for our anniversary, insisting that my old one was outdated and that this new model had better security features. He'd also suggested that we hire a new housekeeper, a young woman named Sophia who seemed more interested in going through our personal belongings than actually cleaning. The most unsettling change was how he'd started questioning my friendships and work relationships. He'd make subtle comments about my best friend Nadia, suggesting that she was jealous of our marriage and might not have my best interests at heart. He'd ask probing questions about my male colleagues, wanting to know details about their personal lives and whether any of them had ever made inappropriate comments to me. "I just worry about you, Jamie," he'd say when I questioned his sudden interest in my interactions with other people. "You're so trusting, so willing to see the best in everyone." I've seen too many cases in my legal practice where people take advantage of that kindness. But despite these changes, I still trusted Dawn completely. He was my husband, my partner, the man I'd built a life with. When he suggested that I was being paranoid or oversensitive about his behavior, I believed him. When he explained away his secretive phone calls as attorney-client privilege, I accepted it. When he said his increased travel was necessary for building the firm's client base, I supported him. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in February. Minneapolis was in the grip of a brutal cold snap, with temperatures dropping to 15 below zero and wind that cut through even the heaviest winter coats. I'd planned to work from home that day, but our internet went out around noon, and I needed to finish a crucial presentation for a client meeting the next morning. Dawn's law office was only about 20 minutes from our house, and I knew he kept backup files of everything on a secure server there. He'd given me the access codes months earlier when I'd helped him organize some client files, and he'd told me I was welcome to use his office whenever I needed a quiet place to work. I called his office to let him know I was coming, but his assistant Brooke told me he was in court all afternoon and wouldn't be back until evening. Perfect, I thought. I could use his office to finish my presentation without interrupting his work. Dawn's office building is a sleek glass tower in downtown Minneapolis, the kind of place where everyone wears $1,000 suits and speaks in hushed, important tones. Thornton and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the Mississippi River and the city skyline. I'd been to Dawn's office many times over the years, usually for company holiday parties or when I'd meet him for dinner downtown. It was exactly what you'd expect from a successful corporate lawyer: rich mahogany furniture, leather-bound law books, expensive art on the walls, and photographs of Dawn with various politicians and business leaders. But that day, something felt different. Maybe it was because the office was nearly empty, or maybe it was because I wasn't there as the wife making a social visit, but I found myself really looking at the space for the first time. The layout seemed off somehow, like the proportions didn't quite make sense. I'd been working at Dawn's desk for about an hour when I got up to stretch and walk around. That's when I noticed something odd about the bookshelf that covered most of the back wall. The shelving unit was enormous, stretching from floor to ceiling and filled with legal volumes, but there was something about the way it was positioned that caught my attention. I walked over to examine it more closely and realized that the bookshelf didn't quite reach the corner of the room. There was a gap of maybe 6 inches between the right edge of the shelving and the wall, and when I looked more carefully, I could see that the gap continued behind the bookshelf. It was as if the entire unit had been built to conceal something. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started running my hands along the edges of the bookshelf, looking for some kind of mechanism or handle. About halfway up on the right side, I found a small lever disguised as a decorative brass fitting. When I pressed it, I heard a soft click, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward like a door. My heart was pounding as I stepped into the hidden space behind the bookshelf. It was a small room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with no windows and harsh fluorescent lighting that came on automatically when I entered. But it wasn't the room itself that made my blood run cold. It was what covered every wall. Photos. Hundreds and hundreds of photos, all meticulously organized and labeled. And they weren't just random pictures. They were surveillance photos, taken with telephoto lenses from hidden positions. Photos of women going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they were being watched and documented. I recognized myself immediately in dozens of the photos. There I was leaving my office building, walking to my car, meeting Nadia for lunch, even sleeping in our bedroom. Some of the photos were recent, but others went back years. I found pictures of myself from when Dawn and I were still dating, images that had been taken long before he'd ever mentioned being interested in photography. But I wasn't the only subject. There were entire walls dedicated to other women, each section carefully labeled with names, dates, and what appeared to be personal information. Sarah Matthews, 32, works at First Bank downtown, lives alone, no security system. Lisa Rodriguez, 29, teacher at Roosevelt High, walks dog every morning at 6 a.m., predictable route. As I moved through the room, the photos became increasingly disturbing. For each woman, the collection would start with distant surveillance shots and gradually become more intimate and invasive. Photos taken through windows, images captured in private moments, pictures that could only have been taken by someone who had gained access to their homes. And then, for each woman, the photos would simply stop. The final images in each collection showed the women looking frightened or distressed, and then nothing. No more surveillance shots, no more documentation. It was as if they had simply disappeared from Dawn's interest, or worse, disappeared altogether. I found a filing cabinet in one corner of the room, and with trembling hands I opened the top drawer. Inside were detailed dossiers on each woman, complete with personal information that no one should have had access to: social security numbers, bank account information, work schedules, family contacts, medical records. Someone had been conducting incredibly thorough background investigations on these women. But the most chilling discovery was a leather-bound journal that documented what Dawn called his projects. In his own handwriting, he'd recorded detailed observations about each woman's habits, vulnerabilities, and psychological profiles. He'd rated them on various criteria: attractiveness, intelligence, financial status, and something he called control potential. The entry about me was 40 pages long and went back to before we'd even met. Jamie Williams shows excellent potential for long-term project, it began. Successful career provides financial benefits, but not so successful as to be independent. Strong desire for approval and validation makes her susceptible to manipulation. Limited family support system creates isolation opportunities. As I read further, I realized that our entire relationship had been carefully planned and orchestrated. Our chance meeting at the charity gala hadn't been chance at all. Dawn had been studying me for weeks, learning my interests and preferences, and had positioned himself to seem like the perfect match for everything I wanted in a partner. The journal documented how he'd manipulated our courtship, engineering situations to make himself seem more appealing, while gradually isolating me from friends and family members who might have questioned his behavior. He'd even influenced my career decisions, steering me toward positions and opportunities that would make me more dependent on him financially and emotionally. But the most terrifying entries were the recent ones. Dawn had been growing bored with what he called the maintenance phase of our relationship and was beginning to plan what he referred to as transition protocols. From what I could understand, He was preparing to end our marriage in a way that would give him access to my assets while eliminating any potential complications. I photographed as many pages as I could with my phone, my hands shaking so badly that some of the images came out blurred. I also took pictures of the photo walls and the filing cabinet contents, trying to document as much evidence as possible before Dawn returned to the office. As I was preparing to leave the secret room, I heard voices in the main office. Dawn had returned early from court, and he was talking to someone. I could hear two distinct voices, both male. I quickly turned off the lights in the hidden room and pulled the door closed, but I realized with growing panic that I was trapped. The only way out of Dawn's office was through the main door, and Dawn was standing right there. I crept closer to the bookshelf and listened to the conversation happening just a few feet away. What I heard made my blood turn to ice. "The timing needs to be perfect," Dawn was saying. "It has to look completely natural, like an accident or a medical emergency. Jamie's been under a lot of stress at work lately, and she has a family history of heart problems. No one will question it if she has a sudden cardiac event." "And you're sure about the insurance policies?" The other voice belonged to David Thornton, Dawn's business partner. $2 million in life insurance, plus the house is worth about $800,000. Her retirement accounts and investment portfolio are worth another $600,000. "I'll inherit everything as the surviving spouse, and with her gone, there won't be anyone asking questions about the firm's finances." I had to bite my hand to keep from gasping out loud. They were planning my murder, and they were discussing it like a business transaction. "What about the other loose ends?" David asked. "Already handled," Dawn replied. "Sophia has been documenting Jamie's erratic behavior for months. Strange mood swings, forgetfulness, paranoid accusations about me having an affair. When Jamie dies suddenly, everyone will remember how stressed and unstable she'd become. They'll think the pressure finally got to her." "And the other projects?" "All completed successfully. No loose ends there either. Jamie will be the final one, and then we can move the operation to a different city, maybe Denver or Seattle." I realized I was listening to two psychopaths discuss not just my planned murder, but the murders of all those other women whose photos lined the walls of that secret room. Dawn wasn't just a manipulative husband. He was a serial killer who had been using his law practice as a cover for hunting and murdering women for years. I stayed hidden in that secret room for what felt like hours, listening to Dawn and David discuss the logistics of my death with the same casual tone they might use to plan a vacation. They talked about how to trigger a heart attack, how to make it look like I'd been alone when it happened, and how quickly Dawn could liquidate my assets after the funeral. Finally, around 6 p.m., I heard them leave the office together. I waited another 20 minutes to make sure they were really gone before I crept out of the hidden room and gathered my things from Dawn's desk. My mind was racing as I tried to process what I'd learned and figure out what to do next. I couldn't go home. If Dawn was planning to kill me, going back to our house would be walking straight into a trap. But I couldn't go to the police either, at least not yet. Dawn was a respected lawyer with connections throughout the Minneapolis legal system. Without concrete evidence, who would believe such an incredible story? I drove to a hotel downtown and checked in under a fake name, paying cash for the room. Then I called my sister Ruby, who lives in St. Paul and works as a high school teacher. Ruby has always been the practical one in our family, the person who thinks things through carefully before acting. "Jamie, what's wrong?" she asked immediately when she heard my voice. "You sound terrible." I told her everything. The secret room, the photos, the journal, the conversation I'd overheard. Ruby listened in shocked silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me get the whole horrifying story out. "We need to call the police," she said when I finished. "With what evidence?" I asked. "I took some photos with my phone, but they could be fake. And Dawn's journal entries could be dismissed as fiction. He's a respected lawyer, Ruby. People are going to believe him over me, especially if he starts talking about my mental health issues the way he was planning." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. What if we hire a private investigator, someone who specializes in this kind of case? They would know how to gather evidence that would hold up in court. That night, from my hotel room, I started researching private investigators in the Minneapolis area. I found Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in domestic violence cases and had extensive experience with stalking and harassment investigations. His website included testimonials from women who had been in situations similar to mine. I called Marcus's emergency number at midnight and left a detailed voicemail explaining my situation. He called me back within an hour, and we arranged to meet the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown St. Paul, far from anywhere Dawn might see us. Marcus Webb turned out to be exactly what I needed: calm, professional, and experienced enough not to be shocked by my story. He'd seen cases like this before, he told me, though rarely with such extensive documentation and planning. "The secret room changes everything," he said after I'd shown him the photos I'd taken. "That's physical evidence of criminal activity. But we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If your husband is as dangerous as you believe, we can't afford to make any mistakes." Marcus explained that we needed to build an airtight case before involving law enforcement. We needed to gather evidence not just of Dawn's plans to kill me, but of his involvement in the disappearances of the other women. That meant tracing his movements, analyzing the timeline of his projects, and potentially connecting him to missing persons cases across multiple jurisdictions. "This is going to take time," Marcus warned me. "Weeks, maybe months. And during that time, you'll need to continue pretending that everything is normal. Can you do that? Can you go home and act like the loving wife while we build the case against him?" The thought of going back to that house, of sharing a bed with a man who was planning my murder, made me feel physically sick. But I knew Marcus was right. If I suddenly disappeared or changed my behavior dramatically, Dawn would know something was wrong, and he might accelerate his timeline for killing me. So I went home. I walked into our beautiful house in Edina, kissed my husband when he greeted me at the door, and listened to him express concern about where I'd been all day. "I was worried about you, honey," he said, his voice full of what sounded like genuine care. "Brooke said you stopped by the office, but when I got back from court, you were gone. I called your cell phone several times." "I'm sorry," I said, forcing myself to smile. "The presentation was more complicated than I thought, and then I had dinner with Ruby. I should have called." Dawn studied my face carefully, and I could see him cataloging my expressions and body language the same way he'd documented the other women in those photos. "You seem stressed," he observed. "Maybe you should take some time off work. You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." "Maybe you're right," I agreed, even though the suggestion made my skin crawl. Dawn wanting me to isolate myself from work was probably part of his plan to make my eventual murder seem more plausible. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived a double life that nearly drove me to a complete breakdown. During the day, I went to work, had lunch with friends, and maintained all the normal routines of my life. But every evening, I came home to a house that felt like a trap, shared meals with a man who was planning my death, and lay awake at night wondering if I'd wake up in the morning. Meanwhile, Marcus was building an incredible case. He'd connected Dawn to at least 7 missing women across 3 states, all of whom fit the profile I'd seen documented in that secret room. He'd also discovered financial irregularities at Thornton & Associates that suggested Dawn and David had been embezzling client funds to finance their murder operation. The breakthrough came when Marcus found Linda Morrison, a woman from Chicago who had escaped Dawn's project 3 years earlier. Linda had been stalked and harassed by Dawn for months, but she'd managed to get away when she'd accidentally discovered surveillance equipment he'd hidden in her apartment. He told me his name was Dawn Tomas, Linda said during our video and call, but when I saw the photos you sent, I knew it was the same man. He's a predator who picks successful, independent women and gradually destroys their lives. I tried to go to the police in Chicago, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do anything. By the time I'd gathered enough proof, he'd already disappeared. Linda's testimony, combined with the evidence from the secret room and Marcus's financial investigation, gave us everything we needed to involve law enforcement. But we decided to wait for one more piece of evidence, catching Dawn and David in the act of planning my murder. Marcus had installed hidden recording devices in our house and Dawn's office, and we'd been capturing conversations for over a week. Finally, we got what we were waiting for. Dawn and David were recorded discussing the exact method they planned to use to kill me, a lethal injection that would mimic a heart attack administered while I was sleeping. "We'll do it this Friday night," Dawn said on the recording. "Jamie always takes that sleeping medication on weekends, so she'll be unconscious. The injection will work within minutes, and by the time the paramedics arrive, it will be too late. The autopsy will show cardiac arrest consistent with her family medical history." That was all we needed. Marcus contacted Detective Sarah Kim at the Minneapolis Police Department, a specialist in domestic violence and homicide cases. Within 24 hours, we had a complete task force assembled, including FBI agents who were interested in the multi-state aspects of Dawn's crimes. The plan was to arrest Dawn and David on Friday evening, just hours before they planned to kill me. But we wanted to catch them with the murder weapon in their possession, so we decided to let them proceed with their plan right up until the moment they entered our house. Friday was the longest day of my life. I went to work as usual, had lunch with Nadia, and even stopped by the mall to buy a new dress for what I told Dawn would be a romantic dinner at home. Every interaction felt surreal, like I was watching someone else live my life while I observed from a distance. Dawn was unusually attentive that day, bringing me flowers and suggesting we order takeout from my favorite restaurant. "I want tonight to be special," he said, and the irony of his words made me feel nauseous. He wanted our last night together to be memorable, just not for the reasons he was telling me. At 9 p.m., just as I was pretending to take my sleeping medication, I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the bedroom window, I could see David getting out of a black sedan with a small medical bag in his hand. This was it. They were coming to kill me. And in just a few minutes, this nightmare would finally be over. I heard Dawn let David into the house and listened to their muffled conversation downstairs. According to the plan, I was supposed to be unconscious from the sleeping pills by now, making it easy for them to enter the bedroom and inject me with whatever lethal substance they'd prepared. But instead of two murderers creeping up the stairs, what I heard next was the sound of the front door being kicked in and Detective Kim shouting, "Minneapolis police! Everyone on the ground now!" The arrest was swift and decisive. Dawn and David were both caught with syringes containing a lethal dose of potassium chloride, exactly the substance Marcus had predicted they would use. The search of our house revealed additional evidence, including detailed notes about the timing of my murder and plans for disposing of my body. But the most satisfying moment came when Detective Kim led Dawn past the bedroom where I was supposedly lying unconscious. He looked through the doorway and saw me standing there, very much alive, with a team of FBI agents and the complete contents of his secret room spread out on our bed. "Hello, Dawn," I said calmly. "Or should I say Daniel Torres? Or maybe you prefer one of your other aliases?" The look of shock and rage on his face was something I'll never forget. For 12 years, he'd been in complete control of our relationship, manipulating every aspect of my life while planning my eventual murder. But in that moment, he realized that I'd outsmarted him, that I'd uncovered his secrets and turned his own weapons against him. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled as the officers handcuffed him. "You were supposed to be perfect. You were supposed to be grateful for everything I gave you." "What you gave me," I said, "was 12 years of living with a monster. And now you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about how the woman you underestimated brought down your entire operation." Dawn Tomas and David Thornton were both convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and racketeering. Dawn received 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, while David got 5 life sentences. The investigation ultimately connected them to 12 confirmed murders across 6 states, making it one of the largest serial killing cases in Minnesota history. The trial was a media sensation, partly because of the sophisticated nature of their operation, and partly because of the secret room that had contained evidence of so many crimes. I testified for 3 days, describing how Dawn had manipulated and controlled me while planning my murder, and how I'd managed to gather the evidence that brought him down. Recovery has been a long and difficult process. For months after the arrests, I couldn't sleep without medication, couldn't trust new people I met, and couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I sold the house in Edina immediately after the trial. I couldn't imagine ever feeling safe there again, and moved to a secure apartment building downtown. I also left my job at Nordstrom and started working as a consultant for domestic violence organizations, helping other women recognize the warning signs of manipulative and dangerous relationships. My experience with Dawn taught me that predators often hide behind successful careers and charming personalities, and that the most dangerous abusers are often the ones who seem perfect to the outside world. 6 months after the trial ended, I received a letter from Linda Morrison, the woman in Chicago who had helped us build the case against Dawn. She was starting a nonprofit organization for survivors of stalking and domestic violence, and she wanted me to join her as a co-founder. Today, our organization has helped over 200 women escape dangerous relationships and provided evidence that led to the conviction of 17 different abusers. We specialize in cases involving psychological manipulation and financial abuse, the subtle forms of control that are often overlooked by traditional law enforcement. I'm 39 years old now, and I'm building a new life based on truth instead of manipulation, genuine relationships instead of calculated control. I've learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize red flags that I once dismissed, and to value my independence above the illusion of security that comes from being taken care of by someone else. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not recognizing Dawn's true nature sooner, if I blame myself for falling victim to such an elaborate deception. The answer is no. Dawn was a sophisticated predator who had spent years perfecting his techniques on other women before he targeted me. What I've learned is that the shame belongs to the predator, not the victim, and that survival sometimes means being willing to fight back even when you're terrified. The secret room in Dawn's office was meant to be a trophy case, a place where he could admire the evidence of his successful manipulations and murders. Instead, it became the instrument of his destruction and the source of justice for all his victims. Sometimes, the very tools that predators use to control us can become the weapons we use to destroy them. I'm Jamie, and I survived a 12-year marriage to a serial killer. But more than that, I fought back, gathered evidence, and made sure that monster will never hurt another woman again. And if my story can help even one other person recognize the signs of a dangerous relationship and find the courage to fight back, then everything I went through will have been worth it.